Imagine waking one morning and discovering that the person you are supposed to marry is a stranger. Not a stranger you met yesterday. Not someone whose face you have seen across a crowded market. A complete stranger. You know his name. You know the name of his father. You know the village where he lives. Perhaps you have heard that his family owns several fields, that his castle has a stone tower, or that his mother is considered a respectable woman. You may even know how old he is, but you have never seen his face. You have never heard his voice. You have never held his hand. And tomorrow you are expected to marry him. For a medieval woman, this was not always a story of romance. Sometimes, marriage was an agreement made long before two people ever stood in the same room. Families negotiated. Land changed hands. Dowries were promised. Political alliances were created. And somewhere in the middle of all those calculations was a young woman waiting to discover what kind of man would become her husband. This is the story of one such woman. Her name was Eleanor. And until the morning of her wedding, she had never seen the man she was about to marry. Before we begin, tell us where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more amazing story. Let's dive into this story. It was late autumn in the year 1274. Rain had been falling since before sunrise. Beyond the walls of the small manor of Ashcombe, the countryside had disappeared beneath a gray curtain of mist. The fields were empty. The last autumn leaves clung stubbornly to the branches of the old oak trees. Inside the manor, however, the household was awake. Servants moved through the corridors carrying baskets of bread, bowls of porridge, and wooden buckets of water. A fire burned in the great hall. Eleanor sat near the window, quietly embroidering a strip of linen. She was 17 years old. She had spent most of her childhood within the walls of Ashcombe. She knew every staircase, every room, every creaking wooden door. She knew where the winter winds entered through the cracks in the stone. She knew which servants sang while working. She knew which horse in the stable disliked being saddled. Her world was small, but it was familiar. And that morning, everything was about to change. Her father entered the room carrying a folded piece of parchment. He looked unusually serious. Eleanor. She immediately looked up. Yes, father? Come here. She placed her embroidery aside. There was something in his voice that made her nervous. She approached him. Her father unfolded the parchment. A messenger arrived this morning. Eleanor waited. From Lord Robert of Blackmere. She knew the name. Everyone in the region knew the name. Blackmere was a larger estate than Ashcombe. Its land stretched across several villages. Its lord owned vineyards, mills, horses, and a fortified stone residence. Eleanor had heard stories about the family since childhood, but she had never met them. Her father looked at her. The negotiations are complete. Eleanor's heart began beating faster. What negotiations? Her father was silent for several seconds. Then he said, "Your marriage." The room seemed suddenly very quiet. Eleanor stared at him. "My marriage?" "Yes." "To whom?" Her father lowered his eyes to the parchment. Lord Thomas of Blackmere. Eleanor had heard the name, but only the name. She had never seen him. She did not know his face. She did not know his voice. She did not know whether he was kind or cruel. She did not even know whether he was tall. "How old is he?" 26. Eleanor swallowed. "And when will I meet him?" Her father looked at her. "At the wedding." For several moments, Eleanor said nothing. Outside, rain struck the window. At last she whispered, "At the wedding?" Her father nodded. "The arrangements have already been made." Chapter 2. A husband in name only. The idea seemed impossible to Eleanor. How could someone become your husband without first becoming someone you knew? She had grown up hearing stories about love. Traveling musicians sang about knights who fell in love with noble ladies. Poets wrote about beautiful women who secretly exchanged letters with handsome men. But those stories were songs. Her life was different. Her father explained that the marriage had been carefully arranged. The two estates had neighboring lands. Blackmere had wealth. Ashcombe had a useful strategic position near an important road. The marriage would strengthen both families. There was nothing unusual about it. To her father, the arrangement was sensible. To Eleanor, it felt like stepping into darkness. That evening, she sat beside the fire with her mother. Mother? Yes. Do you think he is kind? Her mother smiled faintly. I don't know. You don't know? I have never met him. Eleanor stared into the flames. Has anyone from our family met him? Your uncle met his father. But not Thomas. No. Eleanor was silent. Then she asked, what if I don't like him? Her mother paused. That was not an easy question. In marriage, she finally said, people sometimes learn to like one another after they marry. Eleanor looked at her. Sometimes? Her mother smiled sadly. Sometimes. Chapter 3. The Man She Had Never Seen. Over the following weeks, Eleanor began asking questions. She asked the servants. She asked merchants who visited the manor. She asked travelers. She asked her father's steward. She wanted to know everything about Thomas. What did he look like? Was he serious? Did he laugh? Was he violent? Was he religious? Did he drink? Did he hunt? Did he have a temper? Every answer was different. One merchant claimed Thomas was a tall man with dark hair. A traveling priest said he had brown hair. A servant who had once visited Blackmere insisted that Thomas was fair-haired. Someone else said he had a scar on his cheek. Another said he had no scar at all. Eleanor began to realize something strange. Even people who had supposedly seen him could not agree on what he looked like. Perhaps that was what frightened her most. She was preparing to marry a man who existed almost entirely as a collection of rumors. She knew his name. She knew his family. She knew his wealth. But the person himself remained hidden behind distance. Chapter 4. The Dowry. As winter approached, preparations intensified. Eleanor's mother began assembling her dowry. There were dresses, linen, a chest of household goods, silver spoons, a small collection of jewelry, and several pieces of embroidered cloth that had taken Eleanor years to complete. Her mother inspected everything carefully. This will go with you. Eleanor touched the silver cup. What if I don't want to leave these things? Her mother looked at her. These are not really the things you are leaving behind. Eleanor understood. The true thing she was leaving behind was Ashcombe. Her childhood. Her familiar rooms. Her father's hall. Her mother's voice. The servants she had known since childhood. The fields beyond the window. Everything familiar. And in exchange, she would receive a new home. A new family. And a husband whose face she had never seen. The portrait. One afternoon, Eleanor's father received another messenger from Blackmere. The messenger carried a small wooden box. Inside was a miniature painted portrait. Eleanor stared at it. Her father handed it to her. Thomas. She held the painting carefully. For the first time, she saw the man she was going to marry. He appeared younger than she expected. His hair was dark. His expression was serious. He wore a dark tunic. The painting was small and imperfect. Yet Eleanor could not look away. She studied his eyes. They were difficult to interpret. Was he proud? Sad? Tired? Perhaps the painter had simply been unable to capture his expression. Do you like him? Her father asked. Eleanor looked embarrassed. I don't know him. But you have seen his face. She smiled slightly. That isn't the same thing. Her father nodded. For the first time, he seemed to understand how frightening the situation was. The night before, the wedding date was set for early spring. The weeks passed quickly. Eleanor learned the prayers she would need. She practiced walking in her wedding dress. She listened while older women explained the responsibilities of a wife. Some advice was practical. Some was frightening. Some was simply strange. Be patient. Do not embarrass your husband. Learn his habits. Respect his mother. Keep the household orderly, and remember that a marriage takes time. That final piece of advice stayed with Eleanor. A marriage takes time. Perhaps that was what she needed. Perhaps she did not need to love Thomas immediately. Perhaps she only needed to meet him, to speak to him, to discover that behind the name was a real person. The night before the wedding, Eleanor could not sleep. She stood beside the window. The moon was hidden behind clouds. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. She touched the small portrait of Thomas. Tomorrow she would finally meet him. Tomorrow he would stop being a painting. He would become a man. Her husband. The journey. The wedding party left Ashcombe shortly after sunrise. Eleanor rode in a covered wagon. Her mother traveled beside her. Behind them came servants, horses, wagons carrying her belongings, and several armed guards. The journey to Blackmere took most of the day. As the manor disappeared behind them, Eleanor looked back through the small opening in the wagon. She wondered whether she would ever see Ashcombe the same way again. The countryside passed slowly. Forests, fields, small villages, church towers, frozen streams. Then, toward evening, Blackmere appeared. It stood on a low hill surrounded by stone walls. A square tower rose above the trees. Smoke drifted from several chimneys. Eleanor's heart began beating faster. Somewhere inside those walls was Thomas, her future husband, a man she had never met. The first sight. The gates opened. The wedding party entered the courtyard. Servants rushed forward. Horses stamped their feet against the cold ground. Eleanor stepped down from the wagon. Then she heard footsteps. She looked up. A man was standing at the entrance of the great hall. Dark hair, broad shoulders, a serious face, a faint scar near his left eyebrow. Eleanor froze. It was him, Thomas. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them seemed to disappear. He looked at her. She looked at him. This was the first time they had ever been in the same place. The first time they had ever seen each other. And tomorrow they would be married. Thomas slowly approached. "My Lady Eleanor." His voice surprised her. It was softer than she expected. "My lord." He smiled. Not confidently. Almost nervously. "I am glad you arrived safely." Eleanor nodded. "Thank you." Silence followed. Neither knew what to say. Finally, Thomas looked at the portrait hanging from a chain around Eleanor's neck. "You have it." Eleanor touched it. "Your father gave it to me." Thomas smiled. "I never liked that painting." "Why?" "It makes me look angry." Eleanor looked carefully at him. "You don't look angry now." His smile grew. Perhaps the painter was wrong. For the first time in months, Eleanor laughed. It was a small laugh, but it changed everything. Two strangers. That evening, Eleanor and Thomas were given an opportunity to speak privately. They sat beside a large fireplace. Neither seemed comfortable. Thomas looked at her. "I suppose this is strange." Eleanor smiled. "Very. I don't know anything about you." "I don't know anything about you either." He nodded. "I know you like horses." Eleanor looked surprised. "How?" "Your father told mine." She smiled. "I do. And you embroider." "Apparently." Thomas laughed softly. "Your mother told mine." Eleanor looked at him. "Then perhaps our parents know more about us than we do." Thomas laughed. For the first time, Eleanor felt less afraid. They talked for hours. She learned that Thomas liked falconry. He learned that Eleanor hated winter. She discovered that he had a younger sister. He discovered that she loved old stories. She told him about Ashcombe. He told her about Blackmere. Slowly, the stranger became a person. The stories sung by traveling musicians often made love sound simple. Two people saw each other. Their hearts immediately understood. Everything was perfect. Real life was rarely so simple. Eleanor and Thomas were still strangers. They had to learn each other's habits. Thomas discovered that Eleanor liked to read by candlelight long after everyone else had gone to bed. Eleanor discovered that Thomas woke before sunrise. Thomas learned that Eleanor disliked loud arguments. Eleanor learned that Thomas became quiet when worried. They disagreed. They misunderstood one another. They sometimes spent entire evenings sitting silently. But they also began laughing. They rode horses together. They walked through the gardens. They ate dinner beside one another. And slowly, almost invisibly, something began to grow. Not the dramatic love of a song. Something quieter. Trust. Months later, Eleanor found the miniature portrait again. She held it in her hands. The man in the painting looked unfamiliar now. She laughed. Thomas entered the room. "What are you laughing at?" She showed him the portrait. "You." He looked at it. "I told you I hated that painting." Eleanor smiled. "When I first saw this, I wondered who you were. And now." She looked at him. "Now I wonder how I ever thought this picture looked like you." Thomas smiled. He sat beside her. "You were frightened." "Very. I was too." Eleanor looked surprised. "You? I had never met you either." She laughed. "You were afraid of me?" "Of course." "Why?" Thomas thought for a moment. "Because I knew nothing about you." Eleanor smiled. "Neither did I." They sat quietly. Then Thomas reached for her hand. This time she did not hesitate. Centuries later, people sometimes imagine medieval marriages as simple transactions. A daughter was sent away. A husband was chosen. The wedding happened. And that was the end of the story. But for the people who lived through these arrangements, marriage was not the end. It was the beginning. A beginning filled with uncertainty. For some women, marriage meant leaving everything they knew. For some men, it meant accepting responsibility for someone they barely knew. Some marriages became loving partnerships. Some remained distant. Some became unhappy. Some ended through death, separation, annulment, or other circumstances. There was no single medieval marriage story. There were thousands. Each was different. And Eleanor's story was only one possibility. But perhaps her greatest discovery was this. Meeting someone for the first time on your wedding day did not mean you could never know them. Knowing someone was not always something that happened before marriage. Sometimes it happened afterward, slowly, day by day, through ordinary moments, through arguments, through forgiveness, through shared meals, through illness, through laughter, through grief, through years of simply being together. 20 years passed. Blackmere changed. Children were born. Old servants died. New servants arrived. The stone walls were repaired. The fields changed hands. The world beyond the manor changed as well. Kings came and went. Wars were fought. Villages grew. Roads became busier. But inside the manor, Eleanor and Thomas remained together. One evening, they sat beside the same fireplace where they had first spoken privately before their wedding. Eleanor was older now. Her hair had begun to turn silver. Thomas had scars from years of riding and hunting. He looked at her. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" Eleanor smiled. "I remember thinking you looked angry. You told me the painter was wrong." "He was." Thomas laughed. "And what did you think when you first saw me?" Eleanor paused. "The truth? Always. I thought you were a stranger." Thomas nodded. "That's fair. And I was afraid." "I know." She looked at him. "But you stopped being a stranger." Thomas reached across the table. Their hands met. Outside, rain began tapping against the windows. The same sound Eleanor had heard on the morning her father first told her about the marriage. Almost 20 years earlier. She remembered that frightened 17-year-old girl. A girl who knew nothing about the man she would marry. A girl who thought marriage meant losing control of her future. A girl who believed the unknown was something to fear. Eleanor smiled. Perhaps she had been right. The unknown could be frightening. But sometimes the unknown was simply a story that had not yet been written. The medieval world was filled with arrangements made by people who believed they understood the future. Fathers negotiated. Mothers prepared dowries. Priests arranged ceremonies. Messengers carried letters across long distances. Families calculated land, wealth, inheritance, alliances, and security. But no contract could predict what two human beings would feel once they finally met. No dowry could guarantee kindness. No family agreement could guarantee happiness. And no wedding ceremony could create love instantly. Those things had to be discovered. Eleanor had entered her marriage knowing almost nothing about her husband. But over the years, she learned the small details that no messenger could have carried. She learned how Thomas smiled when he was genuinely amused. She learned which songs he secretly enjoyed. She learned that he became impatient when hungry. She learned that he worried about his servants more than he admitted. She learned that when he was afraid, he became unusually quiet. And Thomas learned her. He learned that Eleanor cried when she was angry rather than sad. He learned that she preferred spring to summer. He learned that she always saved the best piece of bread for the end. He learned that she became nervous before important decisions. He learned that she never forgot a kindness. These were the things no marriage contract could describe. These were the things that transformed strangers into companions. Many years later, when Eleanor's hair had become completely silver, a young girl in the household once asked her a question. "Grandmother, did you love Lord Thomas before you married him?" Eleanor smiled. "No." The girl looked surprised. "You didn't?" "No." "Then why did you marry him?" Eleanor looked toward the window. Outside, the fields were glowing beneath the evening sun. "Because our families arranged the marriage." The girl thought about this. "Did you know him?" "No." "Did you even see him?" Eleanor laughed. "Not until the day before our wedding." The girl's eyes widened. "You married someone you had never met?" "Yes." "Weren't you frightened?" Eleanor looked at her. "I was terrified." The girl sat quietly. "Then how did you learn to love him?" Eleanor smiled. "That is the strange part." She reached for the old wooden box beside her chair. Inside was the tiny portrait of Thomas. The same portrait she had received so many years before. She handed it to the girl. "This picture showed me what he looked like." The girl studied it. "But it didn't tell you who he was." "No." Eleanor smiled. "I had to discover that myself." The girl looked at the portrait again. Then she looked at Eleanor. "Would you marry him again?" For a moment, Eleanor said nothing. Then she smiled. "Ask me tomorrow." The girl laughed. But Eleanor continued looking toward the window. She thought about the girl she had once been, 17 years old, standing beside a rainy window, holding a letter, terrified of a future she could not see. She had believed her life was being decided for her. Perhaps in some ways it was. But the future had given her something no contract could predict. A choice that came later. The choice to know. The choice to trust. The choice to forgive. The choice to build something with a stranger standing beside her. Because sometimes history begins with powerful kings and terrible wars. But sometimes history is simply the story of two people sitting beside a fire, slowly discovering one another. And sometimes the most remarkable part of a medieval marriage was not that a bride married a man she had never met. It was that, years later, he was no longer a stranger at all. The rain continued falling outside. The candles burned low. And somewhere inside the old stone manor, two hands remained quietly joined beside the fire. The story had begun with a stranger, but it ended with someone known. And perhaps, in the end, that was its greatest romance.